The Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purpose of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Well, today's hearing is the first of a series that this subcommittee will hold before drafting a Water Resource Development Act, WATER, for 2026. To kick off the WATER 2026 process, today we have the opportunity to hear from stakeholders from across the nation about the importance of Army Corps Civil Works programs and maintaining a consistent 2-year water schedule. WATER is one of the most important pieces of legislation that we work to draft and pass here at the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and we are proud to do so regularly. Every 2 years since 2014, Congress has passed a bipartisan consensus water bill into law, helping communities across this country. I look forward to working once again with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to continue this important tradition. Water is a critical vehicle to meet the water resources needs in the communities nationwide. Reliable water navigation systems allow for the safe and efficient shipping of cargo that is fueling our economy. Levees protect homes and businesses from flooding. Dams and reservoirs like Lake Lanier in Georgia, where I grew up visiting with my family, also provide flood control for communities, electricity, and opportunities for recreation. WATER 2024 included several important provisions for water needs in the state of Georgia and the country as a whole. Specifically, WATER 2024 authorized a feasibility study for Tybee Island ecosystem restoration and storm damage risk reduction, and modified the feasibility studies for Savannah Harbor and new Savannah Bluff Lock and Dam, updating these prioritizations to effectively and efficiently meet changing needs. In Georgia, 2025 was the busiest year on record for the Port of Savannah, and the Port of Brunswick became America's #1 port for automobiles. A consistent 2-year water process is essential in helping our ports keep up with growing demand and grow our nation's economy. An important part of the water process is the partnership between the federal government and non-federal partners and stakeholders who come together to solve local water resources needs. It's great to see a panel of witnesses today representing diverse interests and geographic areas, but who also are brought together not only by water resources issues, but also by the solutions that waters can provide. I look forward to hearing from each of you today on the importance of water and assisting with flood control, inland water navigation, coastal restoration, beach renourishment, and the ensuring safe movement of goods through maritime transportation. I now recognize Ranking Member Wilson for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing. Through biennial enactment of Water Resources Development Acts, this committee is addressing the water-related needs of our states and local communities. WATERs are a shining example of how Congress can efficiently and effectively meet the bipartisan needs of our communities when we decide it is better to work together than apart. Again, I look forward to continuing my partnership with you, with Chairman Graves, and with Ranking Member Larson to get this done. Mr. Chairman, each of our communities experience unique water resource challenges. We seek to address these challenges through predictable enactment of WATERs, providing the Corps with the tools necessary to address community needs. As stressors or local priorities change over time, this committee has stayed vigilant to ensure that the Corps has the authority and resources necessary to address local needs. The history of Corps bears this out. The Corps' civil works responsibility was initially focused primarily on navigation, developing the coastal and inland harbors necessary for the efficient movement of goods to our young nation. That responsibility was later expanded to incorporate large-scale flood control, in part due to widespread flooding along the Mississippi River that devastated communities and livelihoods. More recently, as more communities realized the economic, environmental, and public health benefits from restoring their environment, Congress expanded the Corps' responsibility to include watershed and ecosystem restoration, the benefits that can be seen in the Florida Everglades, coastal Louisiana, and in the Great Lakes. In fact, just last week, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of enactment of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan through WRDA 2000. This decade-long partnership between the Corps, the state, and other non-federal partners show how large-scale environmental restoration projects can have a tangible, dramatic, and lasting benefit to our communities, our economies, our human and environmental health, and our quality of life. Lastly, in WRDA 2024, the Congress gave the Corps new direction to work with communities to support local efforts to enhance water supply, water conservation, and drought resiliency needs. Mr. Chairman, as we develop a new WRDA bill of 2026, we need to build on the successes of the last few WRDA bills and the enhanced direction for the Corps to partner with communities of all types, large and small, urban, rural, and tribal, economically well-off, and communities that struggle to make ends meet to address their local water resources challenges. It is my hope that WRDA 2026 will continue to ensure that the next generation of flood control, navigation, environmental restoration, and water supply and conservation projects that studies are authorized and allowed to proceed. We must continue to promote community resilience to the challenges faced by extreme weather events and changes to climate conditions on the ground, whether there's too much water, including coastal and inland flooding events, or too little water, such as areas facing increased frequencies of drought conditions. And we must ensure that all communities are given the opportunity to work with the Corps to resolve their water resources challenges. Finally, Mr. Chairman, we have started to hear concerns from members on both sides of the aisle that recent changes in the communication policies of the Corps have led to delays and denials of sharing even the most basic information about Corps projects in members' districts. As the chairman knows, seamless communication between the Corps and members' offices is essential for successful development and implementation of WRDA laws and projects. I hope that these bureaucratic holdups can be quickly dispensed with lest they cause challenges in this committee completing its critical work to develop a new WRDA. I look forward to working with you on this proposal and on our continued partnership to develop another successful WRDA this Congress. So let's get to work, and I yield back.
I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the interest of time, we're voting around 10:30. I'm going to be asked for unanimous consent to put my full statement in the record. But I do want to reiterate a point that the ranking member made. I too have heard concerns from both sides of the aisle about changes in the communication policies of the Corps that are actually driven out of the Department of Defense. And it seems that this is a ridiculous policy. It's a short-sighted policy. My district this past weekend has been the victim of major flooding where the Corps is on the ground working side by side with the local emergency operations center folks. My staff is on the ground working side by side with the emergency operations center folks in order to bird dog problems, and those include problems with the Corps. Are the Corps of Engineers folks supposed to run scurrying away like rats when my staff approaches them in a room to ask for help in order to get culverts cleared out, in order to get dikes inspected, in order to get levees inspected? We have to go ask the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, for permission to save lives in my district. This is a practical impact of a ridiculous, short-sighted policy that is being applied to the Corps of Engineers. How the rest of the DoD wants to handle it is up to them, but we're in flood season where I'm from, and we can't have delays waiting for the DoD to sign off on my staff talking to the local Corps of Engineers folks about the problems we're facing. I wanted to be sure to get that across. Other than that, I really do look forward to the testimony we're at to hear today, and I'll yield back. Thank you.
I think, Mr. Larson, and as to your unanimous consent without objection, so ordered. Yeah, I was trying to remember what I was supposed to say there. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. You probably know, but I'm going to just briefly go over and explain the lighting system. There are 3 lights in front of you. The green means go, yellow means you're running out of time, and when it turns red, please conclude your remarks. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. You want me to go ahead and do that one? I also ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the American Coastal Coalition dated December the 15th, 2025, a letter from the American Association of Port Authorities dated December 15th, 2025, and a letter from the New York City Economic Development Corporation dated December 16th, 2025. Without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Ms. Offner, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Wilson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on priorities for Water Resources Development Act of 2026. My name is Julie Offner, National Waterways Conference, and I am President and CEO. NWC is the only national organization that represents under one umbrella all U.S. Army Corps of Engineers civil works business lines from navigation, flood control, water supply, hydropower, ecosystem restoration, and recreation before Congress and the administration. Many of our members work directly with the Corps across the entire civil works arena. And many of our members are non-federal sponsors of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers studies and projects. They are states, local, tribal governments, as well as special purpose public districts like ports, flood control, levee districts, water agencies. These sponsors share project costs and often assume long-term operation and maintenance responsibilities after the project is completed. At its core, WRDA exists because there are many water resource challenges that are too complex and too costly for local communities to handle. WRDA relies on a partnership of the Congress, Corps, and non-federal sponsors. Congress provides projects, sets policy, and appropriates federal funding. The Corps provides technical expertise, conducts studies, develops guidance, and delivers projects. And non-federal sponsors bring local funding, knowledge, and long-term responsibility. WRDA works best when all three are aligned. This brings me to the first major theme we are hearing from our members, and that is communication. The importance of clear, consistent communication. Sponsors continue to experience gaps in engagement during feasibility studies, project delivery, and permitting. In our experience, early communication often prevents issues that later become too costly or difficult to resolve. Second, sponsors are concerned about keeping projects on track and within authorized estimates. Extended feasibility timelines, evolving design assumptions, and gaps between authorization and appropriation can compound over time. For example, projects that are authorized may not be funded immediately, or may be funded incrementally over multiple appropriation cycles, during which costs rise even when scope doesn't change. This misalignment creates uncertainty for both the federal and non-federal partners. Finally, non-federal sponsors emphasize the importance of predictability in core reviews and decisions across all policies and programs. How and when determinations are made, including reviews, eligibility, real estate, and internal reviews, directly impact local planning, financial commitments, and the ability to move forward. Greater certainty equals more durable partnerships and better projects. NWC is working through a member-driven process to develop specific recommendations for WRDA 2026. We do recognize that not every challenge requires legislation. Some issues may be more appropriately addressed through implementation, guidance, or congressional oversight. In closing, I want to emphasize how important it is to our local communities that WRDA stay on a biannual basis. Predictability matters. When the project is consistent, communities benefit, partners can plan with confidence, and projects are better positioned to move from one WRDA cycle to another. Quite simply, WRDA is a partnership that works, and it benefits us all. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Camillo. You are now recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Wilson, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to participate in this time-honored tradition of public participation in the legislative process. I am Charles Camillo, Executive Vice President of the Midwest Flood Control Association. Our mission is to be a leading advocate to shape policy and secure investments that protect people and safeguard communities from destructive floods. We are at a pivotal moment on the Upper Mississippi River. With the implementation of navigation and ecosystem improvements authorized through NESP and UMRR, our region now has two of the three necessary components to implement a holistic approach on the Upper Mississippi River. All that remains is the third leg of that stool, systematic flood control. The Great Flood of 1993 devastated the Midwest. The flood caused anywhere from $15 billion to $20 billion in economic damages. It is important to note, though, as we gather here today, that the existing flood control infrastructure in place at that time that was authorized and funded by Congress, designed and implemented by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and maintained and nurtured by the local levee districts prevented an additional $19 billion in economic damages. This highlights in a very real way the criticality of undergoing the authorization process that we are participating in today. Flood control advocates came close to realizing the dream of achieving the third leg of the stool when Congress authorized a thorough study through the Upper Mississippi River Comprehensive Plan, authorized by WRDA in 1999. But the stakeholders across the region could not really agree on a plan, and we failed to reach the necessary benefit to cost justification thresholds through the study. So here we are today, 32 years after the devastation caused by the Great Flood of 1993, and our risk remains unchanged. To this end, the long-term objective of the Midwest Flood Control Association is to build lasting relationships to find a long-term, comprehensive solution to the flood problems on the upper Mississippi and Missouri rivers that we can all agree upon. We applaud recent legislation advanced through this committee. WRDA 22 authorized the Upper Miss Flow Frequency Study, while WRDA 24 authorized the Upper Mississippi River System Flood Risk and Resiliency Study. We see those studies as the potential first steps to achieving the long-sought vision for systematic flood protection. We pledge our commitment to being a good partner to find an acceptable long-term solution. But in the meantime, our immediate near-term objective is to help our levee and drainage districts, there are 74 of them, to preserve and maintain their current level of protection and accreditation. We have some reservations with the flow frequency study and its potential impact on current levels of protection and accreditation. We maintain the position that flow frequency studies should not be done in a vacuum. We understand and appreciate that the Corps of Engineers needs the flow frequency data to understand what is happening on the river, but we want the Corps of Engineers to also use that data to develop actionable solutions to offset changes to flood profiles. Releasing new profiles without actionable solutions will impact levee accreditation and cause significant increases in flood insurance rates and significant decreases in property values. The Midwest Flood Control Association strongly supports the passage of a WRDA bill in 2026. Our immediate priorities for such a bill are included in our formal written statement submitted for the record. The Midwest Flood Control is very optimistic about the future. We like what we are hearing from our engagements with the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. We also applaud the leadership at the headquarters, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They asked stakeholders to challenge them on policy and legislation and to give them realistic proposals with specifics, something the Corps of Engineers can sink their teeth into. We feel the priorities we set forth above do just that. We also thank the divisions and districts for their willingness to meet and exchange ideas. At the end of the day, they will be the ones who will need to deliver for us. Again, the Midwest Flood Control Association thanks this committee for your dedication to the bipartisan approach and to improving the lives of Americans from across the country, and for giving us this opportunity to present our views today.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Larson. Good to see you, Ranking Member Wilson, and member of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the importance of WRDA. We appreciate the committee's commitment to enact this important bill into law every 2 years, a regular cadence that keeps projects moving, provides greater certainty to local communities, and ensures that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers respond effectively to the nation's evolving needs. This legislation helps make our communities safer, increases the resilience of our infrastructure, and strengthens our supply chain and trade routes through strategic investments in America's ports and waterways. My name is Brian Jones. I'm president of H&TB's Mid-Atlantic Division. H&TB is an employee-owned infrastructure solutions firm that has provided planning, design, and construction management for large-scale public and private projects across the United States for more than 110 years. We are a long-standing partner to the Corps, delivering civil works projects that reduce flood risk, strengthen communities, and support economic resilience. Members of the subcommittee, this work is personal to me. I grew up on a farm in rural South Louisiana near the confluence of 3 rivers that were essential to my family's livelihood, getting our grain from farm to market every single year. I also witnessed firsthand the consequences of catastrophic system failures, from hurricanes like Katrina and Rita in 2005 to the devastating inland floods of South Louisiana in 2016. These experiences and many others have shaped my conviction that reliable water infrastructure, supported by WRDA's predictable authorization cycle, is essential to the safety, security of our communities, as well as our national competitiveness. Those in this room know all too well that there's no such things as fast enough when it comes to delivering infrastructure improvements. As the Corps and non-federal sponsors growing demands to deliver projects quickly with limited resources, Congress can help by ensuring that they have the flexibility to leverage private sector expertise through a broad range of delivery and financing tools that reflect the scale and the complexity of today's Civil Works program. Integrated design-build contracts, for example, enhance coordination between design and construction on technically complex projects, accelerate delivery, and reduce schedule risk while maintaining cost discipline. Incremental funding approaches also allow large multi-year projects to move forward efficiently within annual appropriations. Public-private partnerships and other collaborative delivery models can further the Corps' capacity, enabling more work to be delivered faster with more effective risk allocation. Broader and more consistent use of these tools represent a prudent evolution of the Civil Works program, supporting timely public benefits, limiting long-term cost growth, and maximizing the return on federal and non-federal investment. H&TB is proud to support the Corps' work by delivering on time and on budget for projects nationwide. With tremendous thanks to this committee and Chairman Sam Graves for their work in authorizing the project, one example of this work is with the Kansas City District of the Corps to design levee, flood wall, and railroad closures, reducing flood risk to the community and protecting more than $10 billion in infrastructure. Another highlight of our work is in New Orleans, which is a vital gateway, as you well know, for U.S. commerce, requiring flood risk reduction systems and navigation projects to support one of the world's busiest ports and waterways. H&TB planned and designed projects such as the West Closure Complex Pump Station, the Seabrook Gate Complex, and the Morganza to the Gulf flood walls, which strengthen storm surge defense while safeguarding key shipping routes. As we look ahead in closing to WRDA 26, I ask that the subcommittee, 1, continue to support streamlined permitting reforms that enable efficient Corps delivery. 2, ensure adequate feasibility phase funding to allow timely and technically sound outcomes for complex projects. 3, to continue and expand authorities that promote concurrent reviews, programmatic approaches, and pilot innovation. 4, to allocate resources to advance innovative funding and financing tools, including public-private partnerships, to optimize project delivery. It has been an honor, Mr. Chairman, to speak with you today and the committee about WRDA's role in shaping our communities and supporting economic growth. And at the proper time, I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I now recognize Mr. Garcia to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for the opportunity to wave on to the subcommittee today. I know that votes were just called, but I'm grateful that we get to have our final witness today. I want to introduce Dr. Noel Hasegaba. Noel, thanks for being here. And first, let me start by personally congratulating you. Dr. Hasegaba is our new CEO at the Port of Long Beach and comes well prepared to do that job, and we just want to congratulate you and excited to work with you, as we have for many years. The Port and the city are very lucky to have your leadership. We know that you're going to continue to do great work at our port. Had the privilege of working Noel when I was mayor of Long Beach for 8 years, and Noel and I actually had a chance to work together in City Hall even prior to that work. You've been an incredible advocate for ports and for trade. He's been a driving force in our port for some of the most impactful projects, including a number of terminal projects planned and underway that will grow the ability to move cargo across the country and, of course, around the world. Noel also directed the port's response to the global supply chain disruptions during the pandemic, and he helped establish the Supply Chain Information Highway, a digital platform to improve efficiency and data sharing across our national freight network. Couldn't be more grateful to have him here today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, thanks again for waving on, and I'd like to yield back.
Dr. Hasegaba, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Congressman Garcia, for your very generous introduction, for your longstanding support for a strong American port system. Good morning, Chairman Graves, Chairman Collins, Ranking Member Larson, Ranking Member Wilson, and members of the committee. It is an honor and a privilege to testify before this distinguished subcommittee today. My name is Noel Hasegaba. As Representative Garcia said, I currently serve as Chief Operating Officer, but on January 1st, I have the great pleasure of assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer at the Port of Long Beach. Together with the men and women of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union and our marine terminal operators and supply chain partners, the Port of Long Beach moves more than $300 billion in cargo annually through every congressional district, supporting 2.7 million jobs across America. In the first quarter of 2025, we moved the most containers of any U.S. port. Though we are a California port, we've moved billions of dollars worth of cargo through many of your home states, including Georgia, Missouri, Washington, and Florida. We export soybeans from the Midwest, hay from Arizona, cotton from Texas, almonds from California, and pork and beef from Texas, Colorado, Kansas, and the Midwest. Additionally, the Port of Long Beach is one of 18 federally designated commercial strategic seaports, which means our infrastructure directly supports national security needs in time of crisis. I'm here today to present priorities not just on behalf of the Port of Long Beach, but in partnership with a broader port community, including the California Association of Port Authorities, who just elected me as their president, as well as the American Association of Port Authorities and the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors. The policies this committee advances through the Water Resources Development Act are essential for our economy and national security. Thank you for working to deliver a bipartisan bill every 2 years. The first priority I will outline for WARDA 2026 is a need for reauthorizing our Deep Draft Navigation Project. This project will deepen and expand the federal channels at our port to 80 feet, improving safety and enhancing efficiency for vessel operations, particularly larger and heavier ships. Long Beach is the only West Coast port capable of berthing very large crude carriers, which hold more than 1 million barrels of oil each. We bring in over 200 million barrels of oil annually, and this project will enhance energy security by facilitating safer navigation. Now, thanks to WARDA 2022, the project has an authorized chief's report and received full pre-construction engineering design funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Our request for WARDA 2026 is the approval of a post-authorization change report, or PACR, which we have been diligently working on with our partners at the Corps. Second, I want to thank this committee for its work over the years to ensure Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund dollars are fully allocated for their intended purpose. The Port respectfully requests your continued support to ensure that annual distribution of these funds is not viewed as optional. As both a donor and Energy Transfer Port, we estimate that the Port of Long Beach alone generated $400 million in HMT revenues in 2024. We are asking for equitable funding for donor and energy ports. Funds for in-water expanded uses were authorized in WARDA 2020, but have been received only once by qualifying donor and energy ports in the FY 2024 Army Corps Work Plan. This resulted in $49 million for Long Beach, which we are using for dredging, as well as critical seismic and safety improvements at our wharves and quays. Ports need reliable HMT expanded use funding to complete safety improvements, and we ask for the committee's help in advancing this priority through WARDA. While today's hearing is on WARDA, I also want to thank the committee for your work on the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill, as ports need both strong water and landside networks to support critical supply chains. In closing, the Port of Long Beach appreciates the committee's leadership to ensure America's maritime infrastructure remains strong and globally competitive through WARDA. There is no substitute to seeing port operations firsthand, so I personally invite each of you to tour the Port of Long Beach, including those of you who have already done so, as there's always something new to see. And I promise the weather will be perfect. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the committee, thank you again so much for the opportunity to testify, and I would be pleased to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. The chair's been notified there will be a series of votes occurring on the House floor. The subcommittee shall stand in recess subject to call of the chair. I'm sorry, if I didn't, Ms. Wilson wants me to clarify myself. The chair has been notified there will be a series of votes occurring on the House floor. The subcommittee shall stand in recess, subject to call of the chair. Subcommittee on Water Resources and the Environment will reconvene the previously recessed hearing. I now yield myself 5 minutes for questioning. Ms. Offner, non-federal sponsors are an essential part of the Army Corps of Engineers. I know that's what you were talking about in your opening statement. In your experience, how has the Corps worked effectively with these non-federal sponsors just to carry out our civil works projects?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Non-federal sponsors are an integral part of getting projects on the ground. They actually work with the Corps to identify water resource challenges on the ground. And once those challenges are identified, they do enter into a formal agreement with the Corps called a Project Partnership Agreement, which lays out their cost share as well as their federal requirements and any long-term obligations that they have throughout the process. And I just want to note here that the non-federal sponsors, their funding comes from public entities. So they do share a responsibility to the taxpayer, as does the federal government when designing these projects. Thank you.
Are there ways that the Corps can improve its budgeting process, maybe with multi-year budgets?
Thank you for the question. So the question is, can the Corps improve their processes, correct? Whether it be multi-year and there are many different ways that you can look at this. Primarily, we're going to say communications, that if there's the ability of it works best among all stages of government if we can communicate, and this is even before policies are proposed, studies, projects, and there needs to be touch points throughout the process to really do a discussion about what is working, what is not working, what is feasible, and what we can do moving forward.
Yeah. And I know that was number one on your list when you were doing your opening statement, but can you expand on that just a tad bit more on the communication?
What, the communication?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am, on being more clear.
There are a couple of things that we did flag in the back on the communication. My earlier answer focused on primarily rules and regulations, but we do flag within the testimony concerns with the Department of War memo on engagement with congressional staff, especially during the WRDA process. Taking a step back, we realize as a non-federal sponsor how important Congress and the Corps is through this process, because the Corps can provide technical assistance to both our non-federal members as well as Congress. And so it's really important that we have that engagement.
Okay, all right, thank you, thank you. Dr. Hasagaba, I got it, didn't I? Hasagama, or Dr. Noel. In Georgia, we've seen a serious lack of operations and maintenance dredging work done in our navigability in our ports. Have you seen that at the Port of Long Beach or had similar experiences?
We have, Chairman. There's an old saying that what happens in Long Beach eventually, at our port, eventually cascades across the country, and that's how critical our port is to the nation's transportation system.
Can you give me any pointers on how we can fix some of that?
Well, to take this project that we brought before this committee today and the packer that we're requesting, this deep draft navigation project would enable us to handle larger ships that will handle more energy product. That is not only good for the nation's economy, but it prioritizes and strengthens national security as well.
Right, okay. Thank you. I don't really have time to ask another question, but I'm going to anyway. Mr. Jones, HNTB is recently recognized for its work on public-private partnerships with the Corps. In your experience, how has the P3 approach worked to reduce costs, accelerate schedules, or otherwise improve project outcomes?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. HNTB, as you noted, does have experience with public-private partnerships. We see that across the board that they can significantly, there's opportunities to significantly expand the Corps' capacity compared to the traditional delivery models by utilization of P3s. I think it's worth noting, though, that P3s are not a silver bullet. They're not to be used in every instance. But in working with either the Corps or the non-federal sponsor, understand what the project is, what the goals of the project are, and then consider what alternative delivery opportunities there may be. P3 may, in fact, be the best opportunity to, one, to accelerate the project delivery, get that project online quicker, and leverage private resources that can be brought to bear to accelerate often delayed project schedules.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I am definitely out of time, so I yield back. Chair now recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Wilson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Hasugaba, as chair of the Florida Ports Caucus, I understand your port's goal of remaining competitive in the global market. In your testimony, you discussed your request for a post-authorization change report in WRDA 2026. Can you discuss what Congress should do to keep the PACR process predictable and timely?
Ranking Member, thank you for your question. It's a great question because the reason why we're so we're championing this PACR within the WRDA 2026 is because a project of this type supports the nation's priorities for national security, as well as supports the national economy. And when you look at the PACR, what we're doing is trying to right-size the funding necessary to deliver this project at a time when costs have escalated for a variety of different reasons. And as this subcommittee is well aware, over time, most projects that are under the discretion of Army Corps have also experienced escalation in costs. And what we're trying to do is right-size the funding necessary to deliver this project in order to get this project of national significance up and running to support national security as well as the nation's economy.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Offner, it has come to my attention that many of my colleagues are having difficulty getting information from the Corps as they are forced to wait for the Pentagon to clear the sharing of information. Can you discuss how this change in information sharing has the ability to hinder project development and delivery?
Thank you for this question. And to your point about the Department of War memo, we're hearing about challenges both from the congressional and from the non-federal sponsor level. From the congressional, we're definitely hearing some examples of getting the communication that they need to get from the Corps. And one of the things we keep on stressing is that WRDA is essentially a three-legged stool or a triangle that if one partner is unable to provide information, it makes it unsteady. From a non-federal sponsor angle, we have heard examples of non-federal sponsors asking the Corps for needs assessments and other information that they've been unable to obtain due to uncertainty surrounding how the Corps can interface with entities outside the Corps with this memo.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones, since becoming a member of Congress, I've been pushing to move WRDA into a regular 2-year cycle. This cycle is important because it delivers certainty and routine as we process our nation's needs. Can you discuss how maintaining a consistent cycle helps the industries, local sponsors, and the federal government?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, Ranking Member. As you alluded to, the 2-year cycle of WRDA is critical. I think you heard from all of us this morning the criticality of that 2-year cycle. What it does, Congresswoman, is it provides predictability to the Corps of Engineers as well as the non-federal partners who are out on the ground trying to deliver projects. There is some assurity that with the 2-year cycle that the folks on the ground know what to expect, know how to plan, understand the funding that lies ahead for their projects, where there might be funding gaps that they can look to fill. As in any area of business, particularly in private business, of which I'm fortunate to be a part of, understanding the schedule and having predictability is central to everything that we do, and I don't see it to be any different in delivering public infrastructure projects that are delivered through WRDA.
Okay, thank you very much. I ask unanimous consent that statements from the following organizations be made a part of today's hearing record: the American Public Works Association, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the National Stone, Sand, and Gravel Association, the National Wildlife Federation, and the Port of Tampa Bay. I yield back.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair now recognizes Mr. Crawford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Camillo, you probably know this better than anybody in the room, but just for the purposes of a refresher, I'm going to ask that you indulge me on this. The Water Resources Development Act 2007 established a National Committee on Levee Safety to make recommendations to Congress on a federal levee safety program. Although the committee submitted its recommendations in 2009, it's remained dormant since. In 22, the Corps and FEMA signaled plans to reestablish the committee with a scope that appeared to exceed congressional authority and limit independent recommendations, raising concerns among levee owners. While that effort was withdrawn in 23, the Corps has indicated plans to reestablish the committee. Levee owners report increasing top-down directives and internally developed policies from the Corps with insufficient stakeholder input, even from levee owners with a proven record of meeting federal levee standards. In response to this, during WRDA 24, I submitted a request that would create a levee owners advisory board to restore the collaborative approach to flood protection that many levee owners in my district and the larger Mississippi Valley believe has been ignored by the Corps. That said, can you speak to the impacts that you've heard or observed from your levee owner operators on the failed National Committee on Levee Safety?
Thanks for the question, Congressman. Levee operators, they're on the front lines. They're out there on those levees every day. Nobody knows more, nobody knows better how to protect those levees than they do. To protect people, protect property infrastructure, they know it. They know the risks better than anyone because they live behind those levees and they work behind those levees. Anything that gives them more involvement, more oversight is going to be most welcomed by any levee operator anywhere along the Mississippi River. To a levee district, I think they would tell you that levee safety program, PL 8499, other programs are really cutting their legs out from underneath them. That they're imposing mandates, many of them unfunded, that's just literally kicking their legs out from underneath it. The CEOs, the chief engineers of those levee boards are usually hired by elected levee board members, and those levee board members have people they need to answer to as well. Mm-hmm. And so they're imposing those mandates to give them oversight, to give them more voice in shaping policy and management. It would be most welcome. Had the Midwest Flood Control Association been in existence when you received that letter of support, I think a few years ago, it was signed off on by the Mississippi Valley Flood Control Association, the Missouri River Levee and Drainage Districts, and the Association of Louisiana Levee Boards, we would have signed that letter.
Is it sufficient to say that overhauling this defunct committee and creating a levee owners advisory board is necessary in re-engaging local owner-operators of federal levee systems to improve flood protection?
Sir, I didn't quite catch the question.
I said, what do you think it's sufficient to say that overhauling this defunct committee and creating a levee owners advisory board is necessary in re-engaging local owner-operators of federal levee systems to improve flood protection?
Yes, Congressman. I think that what you would need there is, I believe the old committee when it was dissolved, even before it was dissolved, did not have, for instance, FACA was waived. There was no accountability, no transparency there. I think that would be warranted for anything going forward.
Also, you know this very well, some of the highest rated levees in the nation and my levee districts are continuously improving their levees, as you've indicated in your comments. Along the Mississippi, White, and Arkansas rivers, you find hundreds of structurally sound and professionally managed levees. Despite that, the levee districts within my district are constantly battling FEMA and Corps due to overarching rules and regulations. As the Executive Vice President of the Midwest Flood Control Association, which you represent roughly 75 levee districts yourself, can you speak on the challenges presented by FEMA and the Corps that directly impact your district's ability and the communities they protect?
Yes, Congressman. So on the Upper Mississippi, take this flow frequency study, for instance. Yeah, we don't have the MR&T project up there. It's a lot different system. It's all PL 8499, if they're in any program whatsoever. Take a flow frequency study. If you release those results, they're going to do, the Corps needs that data. If they study that data and they release and it changes the flow frequency, okay, the flood line, the flood profiles, without any solutions. So there is a potential solution out there that is being studied now. The last time we studied something for the Upper Mississippi was 1999. It resulted in a plan that was sent to Congress in 2008, but it didn't recommend a plan. It studied a host of alternatives, but it didn't make any recommendation, yet the new flood profile was out there. So now we're getting ready to release another flood profile. We're very happy. We've talked with the Corps. They've convinced us. We are assured that they're using the right science to develop this flow frequency study. Unlike the MR&T project, if you have a flood profile change in the MR&T, you automatically can just raise your levees. I'm simplifying things, but you don't need additional authorization. You just have to wait in line for more appropriations. That's not the case on the Upper Mississippi. There is a tool, and that's called Section 408 permissions, but the way Section 408 permissions are being interpreted on the Upper Mississippi River right now leaves very little room for levee raises.
Gotcha.
They'll widen your levees. They'll do it for relief wells, things of that sort. But going higher, they're putting so much high contingencies on that it's really unachievable for your local levee districts.
Gotcha. I got to cut you off there, Mr. Camillo. I'm sorry, but I've exceeded my time by a minute, so I will yield.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Friedman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for coming here and joining us today. The projects and studies authorized by WRDA help with waterways, navigable channels, water quality, et cetera. And in my district, probably the most important one of these is the LA River. We have been working for years to upgrade that infrastructure to prevent flooding, which people don't remember was a huge problem in Los Angeles and sometimes still is, and we have a huge rain event coming just this week. We are also making that river accessible to the public and building parks and bikeways along it. In fact, just a couple months ago, I brought Ranking Member Larson, and he was really shocked to see the number of people that were using that recreation in a dense park-poor area on a weekday afternoon. So I look forward to continuing to see that resource revitalized for my community. And I want to come back to that, but first I want to turn to a key priority for the ports of Los Angeles. Having funded the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund with revenues from the Harbor Maintenance Tax, which is the HMT. In fact, donor ports like Long Beach account for 50% of all HMT revenue, yet historically they've received less than 2% of HMT revenue in return. So they're donor ports and they're not getting that revenue back. So in 2020, Congress enacted Section 102 of WRDA 2020, which provided 12% of annual HMTF revenue for expanded uses at donor and energy ports. Mr. Hasabagaba, even though this funding was authorized in 2020, as you know, it took 4 years for the Port of Long Beach to receive a payment of $49 million. Can you elaborate on how the port is using that funding? And also whether, what you will be using that kind of funding for in the future, briefly, if you can do it.
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman. It's important to distinguish between the donor and energy port funding allocated through WRDA 2014, which is continuing to be allocated, and the additional funding through that, what you referenced, Section 102 for in-water expanded uses, that was authorized in WRDA 2020. So what that means for us, the nation's second busiest port, a massive economic engine that generates nearly 3 million jobs and moves cargo through every congressional district. What that meant for us is, in contrast, Section 102 funding, which was not included in the FY25 core work plan, is about $380 million nationwide. For Long Beach, that is a difference of $5.7 million without Section 102 versus $49 million that we received the year prior. So you're talking about nearly a 90% drop in funding that is critical to keep this project that is important for the national security and the national transportation system to be delivered.
Sure, and we all saw during COVID that the ports are so essential in terms of supply chain. We saw boats not being able to get in and out, and what that meant for consumers, what that meant for prices. So I look forward to engaging with my colleagues to make sure that the funds are allocated as congressionally directed. I want to go back now to the LA River, and I'm going to direct my questions to Ms. Uffner. I wanted to talk about and it was brought up before, the deeply concerning directive that was issued on October 15th by the Department of Defense. They like to call it the Department of War because I guess they don't believe in defense or peace. But this directive requires the Corps districts to obtain approval from the Office of the Assistant Secretary of War of Legislative Affairs before engagement with federal or state elected officials or their staff. Now, we have ongoing communication with the Corps all the time about issues on the LA River, for approval of new bridges that have been funded, for flood improvements so that we keep our communities safe. We have had several conversations with the Corps' LA district over the course of this year to get critical updates on ongoing projects like the restoration project, but now they can't talk to us. They literally, under this directive, can't talk to a member of Congress before getting sign-off from the Secretary of War, which makes no sense to me at all. I want to know from you how you think that this new bureaucracy and bloat is going to impact costs, how it's going to impact the ability to protect people from flooding, to get these funded projects done at a time when tariffs are already driving the cost up increasingly every single week. What kind of effect is this going to have?
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman. This could potentially have an impact definitely on the WRDA process, let alone with everyday conversations with the Corps. The challenge is, if you have all three partners work together on WRDA, making sure communities are safe with water, that communication is key at the end of the day, because you have to communicate what is working, what is not working. The Corps has to have the ability to go to Congress and say, hey, here are some of the water problems here are some of the water problems within the communities, and here are some of the non-federal sponsors that have come to me. The non-federal sponsors need to go to the Corps and say, hey, I'm having this problem. Could you help us design something where I can take to Congress? And if that leg is taken out of the equation, it may impact the future WRDA cycle.
Thank you. Well, I'm extremely concerned about the impact of this on life and safety, so I want to thank you so much for being here, and I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Babin for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone, and I just want to thank all of our illustrious witnesses for being here today. I represent Texas 36th District, which includes numerous U.S. Army Corps of Engineer projects, such as the Houston Ship Channel, the Ike Dike, Sabine Neches Waterway, Cedar Bayou, the Anahuac Channel, and many, many others. Ms. Uffner, if I could ask you the first question, as President and CEO of the National Waterways Conference, you represent non-federal sponsors across the country who partner with the Corps and often shoulder a significant local cost for projects. Many Texas communities are frustrated by the long delays, rising costs, inconsistent Corps requirements, even after Congress has already acted. What specific reforms should Congress prioritize in WRDA 2026 to speed up project delivery, control cost growth, ensure non-federal sponsors, especially in states like Texas, are not bearing unnecessary burdens once a project is authorized?
Thank you for your question. There are existing provisions in previous WRDA bills that address ability of non-federal sponsors to take on some responsibilities, like Section 203 for the studies, 204 for the construction, 1043. In reality, these on the ground have not been working as intended because of the number of requirements that are being put on non-federal sponsors by the Corps. Many districts, the challenge seems to be that there are maybe multiple cooks in the kitchen. And so if there's a way to give more authority or give non-federal sponsors the ability to take on more responsibility, because at the end of the day, we want to get these projects to the finish line.
Okay.
And creating a win-win.
Yes, ma'am. And real quick, if you don't mind, how important is it that WRDA 2026 focus not just on new authorizations, but on ensuring Corps fully and consistently implements reforms that Congress has already enacted? How important is that?
I apologize, I missed part of that question.
Okay, how important is that WRDA 2026 focus not just on new authorizations, but on ensuring that the Corps fully and consistently implements what the Congress has already enacted?
That's a great question. To your point, the ASA's office is currently going through implementation for WRDA 2024. There are a number of provisions yet to be implemented. There are some provisions that won't need legislation, that simply need guidance or implementation, but there are definitely some that may need congressional oversight, that you may want to look at how certain provisions within WRDA are working, where are the pain points, and why those pain points exist.
Thank you. And Mr. Jones, you've worked closely with the Corps on major flood protection, navigation, and port projects, and you've seen firsthand how delays and uncertainty affect local communities and private investment. From an industry and delivery standpoint, what changes to WRDA policy or Army Corps practices would most improve certainty, accelerate timelines, and reduce the risk of cost escalation for critical infrastructure projects?
Yeah, well, thank you, Congressman, for that question. As you were alluding to, and Julie was as well, the study requirements, Congressman, are oftentimes too rigid. The study requirements can be protracted over many years, in some cases decades. So working as best we can to reduce that timeline and to reduce the study period and ultimately get these projects into implementation is critical. Again, working with the Corps of Engineers to understand which agency is best suited to lead the project. In all instances, perhaps it's not the Corps of Engineers, perhaps it is a non-federal sponsor. And giving those and ensuring that those agencies and non-federal participants have the tools and the resources and the latitude by which to ultimately achieve the project goal. Quite simply, not to overthink the project and to overstudy the project, but to understand what is the intent of the project, what are we trying to do to best serve our communities, and ultimately find the quickest solution. Sometimes it may involve the private sector, either through private funding, through an innovative financing mechanism, or just alternative delivery applications. And again, just simply, Congressman, thinking outside the box and ultimately trying to achieve what the project is ultimately trying to achieve.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I have a couple more questions, but I'll have to submit those. And thank you, other witnesses as well. Yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Skolton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Collins, Ranking Member Wilson, and welcome to our guests, our witnesses today. Thank you for your thoughtful preparation and helping us get a better handle on what we hope will be a very productive WRDA reauthorization process. I come from Michigan's 3rd congressional district, proud to represent the good people of West Michigan in Congress, where water is a way of life. This is so critical. I'm eager for our committee's work on what will hopefully be a 7th consecutive bipartisan Water Resources Development Act to ensure Congress is helping communities navigate local water resource challenges, boost regional economies, create jobs, and protect our natural environment. This process is inherently a collaborative effort between Congress, the Corps, and local stakeholders. I think we all can agree that it works best when we are in communication with one another instead of having a single top-down approach from Washington that does not take local stakeholders into consideration. However, a new Trump administration process requires approval from so-called Department of War, the Department of Defense, before local Corps districts share regional priorities for upcoming WRDA. While I'm hopeful this routine exchange of information will eventually be greenlit by the Department of War, I'm concerned that this policy will get in the way of a robust and thoughtful WRDA 2026. Dr. Hasegawa, can you speak to how critical it is that there's congressional coordination between Congress and the Corps district offices and local stakeholders like yourself, how critical that is for a thoughtful WRDA process?
Thank you for your question, Congresswoman. There's an old saying, teamwork makes the dream work.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to the important work before this subcommittee, it really takes next-level coordination and collaboration to get things done. Case in point, the project that we're advocating here for on behalf of the Port of Long Beach. This is something that we've been talking to the Army Corps for years now. Having their partnership, having their engagement and involvement throughout every phase of the project has brought this project to it is now. And what we're advocating for today is in WRDA 2026 to authorize the PACR, which will help us to deliver this as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Jones, it seemed like you maybe wanted to say something. Invite your comment as well.
Well, I was just going to piggyback off of what he said. Again, the old sayings, all politics is local.
Yep.
Right? As we all know in this room, local knowledge of projects, boots on the ground, as was talked about with levee authorities. I had the opportunity to grow up with individuals who were farmers and served on levee boards. They knew the levee systems and the flood control systems better than anyone.
Absolutely.
I would just encourage, again, as we've talked about this morning, increased communication that's driven from boots on the ground all the way up to state oversight as well as federal oversight.
Absolutely. I know our office is going above and beyond, being proactive, doing a lot of outreach to our local stakeholders on this issue. We invite feedback throughout this process. We got to get this right. There's a lot at stake. I am so proud, as I mentioned, to represent so much of the Great Lakes Water Basin, miles of Lake Michigan shoreline, as well as a small workhorse harbor in Grand Haven. This harbor supports over 450 jobs and generates $88 million annually in regional economic impact. Earlier this year, Grand Haven's inner harbor was threatened by a potential delay in dredging, something that we know is threatening a lot of our waterways. A delayed dredging cycle could have increased shipping costs by upwards of 30% at a time of already crippling inflation. And disrupted supply chains could have resulted in an estimated $3 to $5 million in additional costs that would have been passed down to hardworking families in West Michigan and across the country. While I was able to work alongside the Corps as well as state and local leaders, again, those local politics, teamwork making the dream work, to ensure the project proceeded on schedule, this story emphasizes how critical the Corps' work truly is and the good deal of work that members of Congress have to do to ensure that these projects continue to move forward. That's why it's so concerning to me that the Trump administration has proposed over $2 billion in funding cuts to the Corps. The president's budget also requests a 15% reduction to Corps construction and a staggering 58% slash to operations and maintenance activities. We simply can't afford not to keep these dredging cycles on schedule. Ms. Unford, can you touch on the importance of reliable, robust funding to ensure that ports like mine back home in Grand Haven and those throughout the nation can remain operational and best support local economies to keep our supply chains moving?
We do support robust funding for these purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Agree that it is essential to make sure that we keep the funding levels where they are. Fantastic. I'm seeing a nod. I'll take that as an affirmative yes. One thing that I am incredibly passionate about is permitting reform. I apologize. I got so excited, Mr. Collins.
Good.
I'll yield back. I'll
Thank you,
submit my
ma'am.
question for the record.
There you go.
Got me talking about
The chair
water
now
and
recognizes Mr. Bost for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Camillo, I'm going to say these things, but I don't have to tell you this. I think you know my district just as well as I do since you live there. My district in southern Illinois has 3 separate navigable waterways within it. Everything that's on the Mississippi, almost to St. Louis, everything on the Ohio, as long as it touches the state of Illinois, and then the Kaskaskia. With that being said, our levee systems are vitally important for protecting farmlands, homes, and communities. We all know how to stack sandbags. We all know how to fill sandbags. We know what the importance of our levee systems are and the concerns that we have. And while I appreciate the work of the Corps and what it does to help ensure the waterways are safe and functioning, I have heard a lot of concerns from constituents about the potential impact that the flow frequency study could have on flood insurance and levee certification for levee districts on the river. Do you share those concerns, and can you provide an example of impacts that could be affected if the profile changes?
Yes, thanks, Congressman, for the question. So there's 2 different areas I would touch on. First is agriculture. A lot of our levee districts in your region especially are agricultural, and you're looking at around, on average about 15,000 acres per levee district. There's some that are 10, some that are 25, but around 15. Talking with the levee operators there, if they were to lose their 50-year flood accreditation or their flood status on the 50 years, if that drops below there, they're looking at anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 per acre. So that's $15 to $30 million per acre at a time when the ag industry is kind of suffering the way it is. On the flip side of that, the urban areas, the Metro East, Southwestern Illinois Flood Prevention District, I think a sliver of that is in your district. That levee district protects 150,000 people in 25 different communities, parts of Interstate 55, parts of Interstate 64, parts of Interstate 70, all those refineries over there in Hartford and Roxana. It protects about $18 billion, 60,000 jobs and $18 billion in property values. If they were to lose their 500-year accreditation status, we're looking at a 20-30% drop in property values. That's $3.6 to $5.4 billion in a drop in property values.
Well, additionally, can you kind of speak to the importance? We know, I know what the problems are, but as far as flood protection, levee districts, as it relates to navigation, like what we've had the problem with whenever the Lynn Small levee blew at they still call it the holiday flood, but it was no holiday for me. So.
Yes, sir. I'm familiar with that issue as well. Look, navigation improvements and flood control. It's a symbiotic relationship. You can't have one without the other. The navigation, the improvements for navigation, the improvements for flood control, they work together in tandem like the wheels of a bicycle, making sure everything operates. So you have revetments and dikes. Those protect the levees from scour. You have the levees. Without the levees, that river would run bluff to bluff. And so the 2 work together to lock that channel into place to make it usable at high water and low water.
Yeah. So the other question I've got here is, and concerns deal with the fact that a lot of we talked about the ag areas. When the levee systems were put up and the levee districts were created, property tax in the state of Illinois was what was used to try to keep and maintain the levees. Unfortunately, that works in a community like a municipality that can have the property tax level they need to repair those. Do you have any suggestions on what we would do in the future with my ag levies, because they're barely able to keep them up because of that?
You're talking about individual agricultural levies?
No, I'm talking about the levies that need to be improved in our levee districts that usually have ag land that pay the taxes.
Yeah, if we don't, if they're not, if we are unable, if they lose those property values and they are unable their property taxes go down, that's less money that they're going to have to maintain and operate those levees themselves. Because they have a lot of, if there's a repair, there's a cost share that comes into it if there's a flood. But for the most part, they're maintaining this, operating this 365 on their own dollars. They will have less, that makes that levy less safe if they don't have the money to maintain and operate it properly.
I appreciate that. My time about expired, and I'll yield back.
The
Thank
chair
you.
now recognizes Ms. Poe for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me just thank each and every one of our witnesses for your testimony. Let me also thank Chairman Collins and Ranking Member Wilson for holding this very important hearing today. My home state of New Jersey depends on waterways, ports, and flood protection to stay economically competitive. From the Passaic River to the Meadowlands, our communities are grappling with aging infrastructure, rising flood risk, and clogged navigation channels that threaten safety and economic growth. This is to say nothing of a critical decades-old flood mitigation projects that remain in limbo. Maintaining safe navigation in these waterways is no easy feat. It requires a functioning federal government to collaborate with state and local government to ensure that community needs are addressed. Last year, we saw the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey partner with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to make substantial improvements for the port's berth maintenance dredging, the berth's rehabilitation, and berth's reconstruction. If we are to build on this success, then a fresh bipartisan must continue to equip communities with the tools to deliver the long-term solutions for modern, resilient ports, waterways, and flooding infrastructure. So I have two questions, and I hope to be able to get to them very quickly. First question, Mr. Hasi Gaba, I'm sorry, as COO of one of the largest, busiest port in the nation, you have firsthand experience managing large-scale navigation infrastructure. As a representative of New Jersey, home to the New York, New Jersey Port Authority, I am particularly interested in how federal cost-sharing requirement affects port planning. Under the 1986, non-federal sponsors of navigation channels improvement must repay an additional 10% of the total project costs at the end of the construction to cover the U.S. Army Corps' administrative expenses. My question to you is, how does the requirement to repay affect your ability to plan, finance, and budget for harbor deepening projects?
Congresswoman, thank you very much for your question and your interest in ports. I like to say that before the pandemic, ports were invisible, and all of a sudden they were thrust into the spotlight, and all of a sudden they're famous, right? And I think it's fair to say that investments in ports like ours and the one that you represent, New York, New Jersey, are investments in the nation's economy, the nation's transportation system. And when it comes to these investments, we can't do it alone. We rely on deep partnerships with federal agencies. And WARDA has become instrumental in our ability to deliver these projects that not only deepen and widen channels, but enable us to move more cargo. And the more cargo we move through our port, the more cargo we can shift to every single congressional district, and the better we can serve the American people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. You know, in your testimony, you point out the unequal distribution of donors and energy transfer allocations at the Port of Long Beach. This is a concern that I share with our Port Authority, which didn't receive this funding in 2023 and in 2025. So how would a 12% Harbor Maintenance Trust funding allocation for donor and energy transfer port build your capacity? And what kind of financial return on the investment do you foresee for the HMTs?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. So for the Port of Long Beach, we generated about $400 million in HMT revenues a year. we estimate we get about 2 to 3% back. So that gives you a sense of the inequity in terms of how much we generate versus what we get. And when you look at the projects that we're collaborating with the Army Corps on, for example, those funds are necessary to deliver these projects that are critical to the nation's security and to the American economy.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. The gentleman, the Representative Burleson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Ms. Huffner, in your testimony, you highlighted the key challenge that non-federal sponsors frequently encounter when it comes to attempting to deliver water resource projects in a timely way. Apparently, the internal governance structure of the Army Corps of Engineers. Can you shed some light on how the internal governance of the Corps has contributed to these delays?
It's probably very similar to Congress when you have committees, subcommittees, and, oh, this is a new one, subcommittees with the districts, the committees with the divisions, and of course Congress with headquarters. So it's about consulting with all levels to make sure that things are aligned, and there are entities who may have different views about what should be required. And sometimes that's where a lot of the challenges come with non-federal sponsors, this back and forth about what is feasible within their project partnership agreement and what is not. So that's what's causing some of the delays.
So would you say that they're operating in a way that is kind of top-down? They actually take direction from the top or the local agencies, or somewhere along the line the direction and the message getting lost by the time it actually gets to the local office?
It may depend on the issue, but there are chains of command that go up and back down about, there are more efforts from the federal level headquarters to delegate more to the districts. Sometimes the question becomes, there's been a number of staff turnover also at USACE where there's a lot more uncertainty there and the checks and balances within the agency.
How has these internal delays impacted, the costs and actually the people that need these resources?
Whether it be permitting studies project, we have found that there have been numerous delays where something might have been estimated to take several months, but may take several years to even get approval. Earlier in the testimony, I talked about Section 203, 204. Those authorities ideally should be a quick turnaround, and it could take several years to get.
That's unfortunate.
But the whole process is very complex.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, in your testimony, you emphasized that expanding private sector partnerships is essential to addressing our nation's growing water resource challenges. Can you expand on how these private sector partnerships could play an important role?
Yep. Thank you, Congressman, for the question. As I said in my testimony and earlier, P3s do have a role to play here. Oftentimes, the ability to bring private capital to bear on a project oftentimes has the potential to accelerate those projects. Public-private partnerships are not a silver bullet for delivery. We know that. But there are many water resources projects where it has proven to be successful. The Corps, in fact, has piloted the implementation and the execution of public-private partnerships in water resources already, and with great success. I would encourage the subcommittee, as you're looking at the next WRDA legislation, to further encourage the utilization of P3s in this space.
Thank you. And Mr. Asigaba, in your testimony, you emphasized that WRDA plays a critical role in strengthening our economy. That is, its impact is clear to me from my home state of Missouri. Just in the year 2024 alone, we exported approximately $401 million in soybeans alone. contributing to, I think, a total of $3 billion in exports. Even though Missouri is a landlocked state, we have tremendous rivers. Can you elaborate on how important WRDA is in maintaining our strong U.S. supply chain and the economies, even for states like Missouri?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. Critically important. By deepening and widening our channels, we can handle more of your soybeans, export those to global markets, and that strengthens jobs and Missouri's economy. It strengthens the nation's economy.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Ms. Norton for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Dr. Hasselbaugh, your testimony highlighted how the Water Resources Development Act plays a critical role in strengthening national security. I agree with you. The Potomac River is the only source of drinking water for the nation's capital. The Army Corps of Engineers produces the drinking water for the nation's capital, which has only one day of backup water supply. If the river becomes unusable for drinking water, which could happen at any time, whether through man-made or mutual events, national security, the operations of the federal government, DC residents, and the National Capital Region's economy would be at risk. What are the risks to national security with the nation's capital having only one source of drinking water and only one day of backup water supply?
Congresswoman, thank you very much for your question. The Port of Long Beach is one of 18 federally designated commercial strategic seaports. This is one of the fundamental reasons why what happens in our port affects the nation's security. But I can also tell you that WRDA is instrumental in helping ports like ours, especially donor ports, energy transfer ports, deepen and widen channels to accommodate more cargo, and those cargo flows feed into the nation's economy. And this is why it's critically important that we continue to invest in ports like ours in order to continue strengthening the nation's security.
Thank you. Ms. Almore, in your testimony, you discussed the benefits of flood risk reduction and stream restoration projects and the importance of maintaining steady progress for these projects once authorized. With the increase in extreme weather events, including heavy rains due to climate change, how important is it that Congress provide full funding projects?
Thank you for the question. And to me, this is almost a twofold answer that first off, authorization to address these issues are really, really important. And each community, as you know from being in DC, has their own unique challenges. And appropriations is very important when we talk about water projects, at least from our non-federal sponsors' standpoint. We're often seeing a disconnect between authorization and appropriations because of the amount of funds that are available. The water needs within our communities are significant, and the need to fund them also exists.
Ms. Allner, what steps can Congress take to prioritize the construction of these projects?
For within the local communities, correct, Congresswoman? On what Congress should do to... Probably Congress really should consider looking at provisions that they have passed in previous WRDA bills to assess what is working to address the needs within local communities And if something is not working, really dig into the reasons why to determine how we can move forward. Because at the end of the day, all of our communities just want to be safe and have a reliable supply of drinking water.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields. The chair recognizes Representative Mast for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that greatly. I want to thank you all for your testimony today. A little bit of it I caught in person, a little bit of it I caught on the screen, but I appreciate all the testimony. I have some questions for you, Ms. Uffner, and the rest of the panel in part, but we'll see. Would you say that every community has their own individual needs? You recognize that? I think we all can, right? You've seen one community, you've seen one community. Or just simply put, would you say all communities have the same needs? Frank and obvious question.
Simple answer. We've always said if you've seen one port, one levee district, you've seen one port or levee district.
Right? They're all unique.
Mm-hmm.
They have unique representatives, unique stakeholders, unique ecological inputs. They're all unique. So I deal a lot with Lake Okeechobee in the state of Florida, managed by the Army Corps of Engineers based on an operations schedule called LOSM, Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual. This schedule, it dictates charges based on lake level, weather forecasting, safety, time of year, what the levels of the lake are at right at that time, a host of different things. And in certain circumstances, the Army Corps of Engineers will open gates, send water through the St. Lucie River and the Caloosahatchee Canal, these are two separate sides of this lake, into estuaries which are described as beneficial by the Army Corps of Engineers. So when you look at that, except transfers to the St. Lucie estuary, they're not beneficial, they're not essential, they actually don't do anything good for our community. We want zero. And you go to the other side of the state, and they want some of those discharges. It's a good thing for them. It goes to the point of you've seen one. So my constituents, they don't want to get harmed by this. Currently, folks on the West, they're begging for water transfers because they don't have enough water. Like I said, my community is saying, don't give us any water. None of it is beneficial to us. So do you think the Corps should listen to local people and include their feedback to determine what is beneficial, impactful, or harmful when it comes to water quality and environmental protections?
Communication is really key, and if the Corps is partnering with local communities, that's when the listening and the coordinating becomes really important, and we can take the top-up or the top-down approach to this. And it's always been NWC's perspective that the local communities understand their local needs the best, and that's what communications need to occur.
Yeah, fair enough. Doctor, how you doing today?
Very well, Congressman. Thank you.
Good. Glad to hear it. Are there divers operating in the Port of Long Beach at any given time inspecting things such as vessel hulls and divers operating there, inspecting hulls, moorings, things like that?
The short answer is yes, Congressman. There are divers, yes.
Seems obvious, right? Yeah. If these inspections couldn't be undertaken because the divers couldn't see their hand in front of their face due to water quality, I know a lot of different water bodies, different water qualities, would the port have to shut down?
Well, anything that gets in the way of commerce or anything that gets in the way of life, human safety, would be a cause for concern, and we would evaluate in coordination with the U.S. Coast Guard.
There you go. I think you pointed to it well, right? Anything that's a cause for safety is something that we need to be looking at. I deal with it in my community again. We're supposed to have Bahama blue water in our area. We get nasty discharges out of this lake that end up making it look like guacamole, and I mean that literally. Sometimes it's so thick that birds can walk on top of it. Fish get suspended in it because of what they discharge unnecessarily into my community. I thank you all again for your testimony today. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from the great state of Ohio, Ms. Sykes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and looking forward to discussing some of the local projects that we have in my community in Ohio's 13th Congressional District. And thank you, one, for your patience and your time today, to all of our witnesses. So as I said, I'm from Ohio's 13th District in Northeast Ohio, and we have areas like Peninsula, Boston Township, Boston Heights, and the residential areas neighboring the Cauga Valley National Park. These areas are expanding, which is fantastic because it's the best place on earth, of course. But this level of expansion does require smaller communities to modernize their water systems to provide accessible and affordable water and sewer services to their residents. And it helps to incentivize businesses to move into and invest in the communities. But we know how hard it is for a municipality, especially small ones, to acquire their own water treatment facilities. And I often tell a story about a local mayor when I was first elected, and I asked him, what can I do to help? And he looked at me, he said, I don't know, because no one's ever asked me that question. In a couple of months, he figured it out and has been asking me, thankfully, for a lot of support, which had mostly been around water and sewer projects. And so in 2024, I was able to secure 2 WRDA authorizations, one for Summit County and one for Stark County. And despite these efforts, my appropriation requests for these were not included in this year's appropriations. I understand my grievance regarding appropriations is not adequate for this particular panel or committee, but it is still worth stating that when in a community who expects these resources to come, who quite literally said, no one has ever asked me how I can help you, we provide the help, but then they're not funded, it's pretty devastating and unfortunate. And so my question for you, Ms. Uffner, is, I know you're mostly non-federal sponsors of Corps engineer projects, but can you talk a little bit about how critical the funding part is? I mean, it's great that we authorize the language, but the funding, I see Mr. Jones, you're nodding too, so please jump in after Ms. Uffner.
Yes, the funding is important. I do want to take a step back here because this is one of the things that we really hear commonly with our non-federal sponsors or potential non-federal sponsors. We got money in WRDA, when are we going to get it? And I really think it's partially an educational process, taking a step back on behalf of all of us, saying, okay, we got money in WRDA, now we have to go to appropriations and really frame all over again why this project's so important to the community.
Mr. Jones, thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. You saw me nodding there. Look, obviously the difference in our authorization and appropriation is critical, right? And most Americans don't realize that construction new start, appropriations is another significant hurdle that can take years, sometimes decades after a project is authorized. And so there's a false sense of hope that once an authorization is cleared and there's opportunities to talk about that with the public expects that project is going to construction oftentimes months after that authorization. And that's oftentimes not the case, right, as you've alluded to. These authorizations sometimes result in inhibiting projects from being funded from other sources, and I think that's an opportunity for this committee to consider in WRDA 2026. In other cases, authorizations actually prohibit funds from other sources being directed towards that project, particularly around mitigation, funding sources coming from FEMA or CDBG, disaster recovery, Department of Agriculture, and so forth. And finally, there should be an incentive, I believe, to commit other sources of funds, whether federal or non-federal, to these projects in order to ultimately achieve the schedule that's desired and expected by the public.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you both for answering that question because it just goes to show how complicated this is. And I've heard several of my colleagues complain about the bureaucracy of this process, which is really harming and raising the cost of many. I'll very quickly turn everyone's attention, and Mr. Camillo, I have a question for you. The city of Massillon, which is in my district, they have repeatedly, and I have repeatedly discussed in the subcommittee, desperate funding needs for a sluice gate replacement. Again, I know this is not an appropriations committee, but still in that bureaucracy, we have been having a hard time getting answers for them to be assisted. And quite literally, I'm not willing to stand by and wait for a disaster. So Mr. Camillo, you have a lot of experience with these types of infrastructure, this type of infrastructure. What are your insights as to what my community could experience in the event that this is not taken care of?
The appropriations process is always a challenge because of prioritization, and there's only so much funding to go around. We recommend a lot of times for our local levy districts to see what's available through the states. For fixing gates, the local state FEMA is sometimes of assistance to those. There's other programs within the state that we have them reach out and try until the federal process comes through.
Thank you for extending me a little extra time. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair recognizes Representative Westerman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I have a great respect for this process, having served as a ranking member on this subcommittee and working through a WRDA bill a few years ago. So this is exciting because it's usually something we can come together and agree on. Ms. Uffner, as you mentioned in your testimony, Congress is best able to deliver effective, timely, and locally driven WRDA reauthorizations when federal and non-federal partners collaborate and engage in conversations, hopefully like the one that we're having here today. As you may be aware, in 2024, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers recreation sites welcomed approximately 260 million visitors nationwide, including millions across Arkansas. I chair the Natural Resources Committee. I think those numbers dwarf the number of visitors to our national parks even. Corps-managed lakes and parks, such as those surrounding Lakes Ouachita, DeGray, and Greeson, are cornerstones of our tourism economy and our outdoor heritage. These sites are not only vital to local economies, they also provide safe, affordable access to public lands for fishing, boating, and camping. However, many of these areas are facing aging infrastructure and significant deferred maintenance. Additionally, fees collected on site are not always reinvested in the locations where they are generated. And as we look forward or toward the 2026 WRDA bill, what opportunities do you see to prioritize the maintenance and modernization of recreation facilities in naturally rich states like Arkansas and across the country?
Thank you, Congressman, for your support and your question. Aging infrastructure is a huge issue across the board, not only for recreation, but for ports, flood control, water districts. And it's just an ongoing issue that is a very complex situation because in some cases you have federal regulations that also may impact the aging infrastructure as well as how to obtain funding for it. So it's about identifying those two parts, permits sometimes and funding issues. And to Mr. Camilla's point that there's a priority of deciding what's going to be funded. So it's about identifying the challenges that are out there and directly going after them.
You mentioned permits, and I can't let that pass without talking about the need for permitting reform. Could permitting reform help stretch our recreation infrastructure dollars further?
The question was, does permitting reform help stretch the...
Could permitting reform help stretch our recreation infrastructure dollars further on core facilities? Or maybe another way to answer that, does it take a long time to get a permit and add cost to the project?
Well, you must have heard my thought pattern behind this. If it does take a long time to get a permit and there are a multitude of requirements, when you're talking about non-federal sponsors, they have a limited amount of money to deal with because they're also funded by the communities that they serve. So the longer the permit process goes, the more requirements, the more that they may have to hire consultants to do this. So anything that helps them streamline to get to a project off the ground is helpful.
I'm just thinking back when I first came to Congress, Lake Ouachita is one of my favorite places to recreate. It's where I grew up, and there was a local organization that volunteered to do maintenance, to pick up trash, and all they wanted to do was make things better, and they were told they had to cease and desist. They couldn't do that because the regulations wouldn't allow them to help make the place better. We did get a little bit of relief on that, but it's still a problem. That's something I think we need to address here in Congress. I could spend the whole time talking about recreation and permitting, but also I have a lot of major waterways in my district, including the Arkansas, the Red River, and the Ouachita River. Many of the levee districts along these rivers face challenges in maintaining their levees in accordance with the Corps system of guidelines. So we have these levees run through very rural areas, and we have limited resources to be able to keep the levees up in the condition that they need to be in, which creates a safety issue. And then we'll have a big flood and the levee washes out and everybody's standing around trying to figure out who's going to fix the levee. The local levee district probably is responsible for it, but the local levee district has no funding to fix it. So I'll just ask the whole panel, do you see any opportunity for collaboration between federal and non-federal partners to address the safety issues being faced by our rural levee districts in these communities? Mr. Camillo, would you like to go first?
Again, those folks are down there walking every day on those levees. They know what's needed, and you're right. When I talk to our levee districts, the challenge is a lot of the unfunded mandates. If they belong to the PL 8499 program, for instance, it's making it almost unaffordable. And I think our fear in our area is that more and more levee districts are going to be withdrawing from that program if the cost is all of a sudden is outweighing the benefit of being into those systems. So there just needs to be some relief on the unfunded mandates.
And with an engineering background, I've always believed it to be true that good maintenance pays for itself over time. If you can keep these levees up and they don't fail, then the cost is much less than after these levees fail and destroy property outside the levee. Plus, then you've got the cost of rebuilding the levee. Mr. Jones, did you have more to add?
Thank you, Congressman. Prior to you walking in, I commented that I grew up in a rural area on the banks of the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya River, so I understand these rural levee systems very well. I believe there's opportunities, again, for programs dedicated specifically to these rural communities that do face these significant maintenance and capital project costs. Another opportunity is to consider, based on the risk, not to and I say this with all due respect to the engineering community of which I work, not to over-design projects that ultimately raise the cost of them beyond the point of achievement, for the sake of over-design for risks that may never actually occur. And so I think there's opportunities in that regard, too, to understand what the real risk is and design to that likelihood.
And Mr. Chairman, you've been overly generous. I didn't realize the time was going the wrong way there. I yield back.
No problem at all. Gentleman yields. The chair will recognize itself for 5 minutes of questioning. First of all, I want to thank the witnesses for being here, not just for your time and expertise, but for the sacrifices you all made to be here with us, and that doesn't go unnoticed, and it's very appreciated. Many communities in my district still lack adequate drinking water infrastructure, and with the Ohio River running right along my district, looking forward to reauthorizing WRDA this Congress. For removing regulatory barriers to investing in water infrastructure, there's a lot of work to be done, which could benefit Southern Ohio. Mr. Jones, I'll turn to you first. We've seen that public-private partnerships have historically led to both faster project delivery and lower costs for taxpayers. The Army Corps has seen those same benefits with projects during a pilot program that specializes in public-private partnerships. Through just 4 projects, the pilot program saved over $500 million and more than 23 years of time. So, Mr. Jones, if this program were to be reauthorized in the upcoming WRDA, how could Congress improve these public-private partnerships to further save taxpayer dollars and deliver these projects in a more timely fashion?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Congressman. As you alluded to, talked about the use of P3s in the water resources space. Critically important tool in the toolbox. I would encourage us to use it as much as possible as the subcommittee in Congress looks to move to the next reauthorization of WRDA. I would encourage you to expand that authority. There's been pilot projects and projects that you alluded to that have been very successfully executed. Again, this is not a silver bullet. It's not made for every project. But for those projects that do have the ability to generate revenue in order to, and use that revenue to accelerate construction, we should be looking for that opportunity. We see this across the economy, whether it's in transportation or in private commercial construction, and now with the development of AI and data centers and alike, and water resources shouldn't be any different. There's opportunities to leverage the private sector and private capital to accelerate construction. Again, saving time and ultimately saving money, it seems like a no-brainer to do so.
Thank you. In 2016, the Army Corps conducted a risk assessment of the Portsmouth-New Boston levee system, in which the evaluation identified the levee to be at high risk. Behind the levee, there are 11,000 of my constituents and 26 critical structures that serve the needs of the community. While I'm grateful that funding was obtained in 2022, high-risk infrastructure should not be forgotten in areas prone to flooding, especially along the Ohio River. I was dismayed to hear in your testimony, Ms. Uffner, that this instance is not uncommon, that the rehabilitation and inspection program is not being used properly to provide repairs for flood-damaged levees, but rather more prospective planning and compliance framework. Ms. Uffner, in the upcoming WRDA reauthorization, how can Congress reform this program so that levees can be repaired before a major flooding event occurs?
Thank you for your question. You know, at the bottom line, I think communication that really needs to occur to find out what the specific problem is with the levees. And I will tell you, all of our non-federal sponsors are telling us different challenges within the districts that they may have. There is a huge concern with the permitting and the unfunded mandates and the new requirements, and there seems to be sometimes shifting of responsibilities that haven't been there before, and so it's just making it clear that the responsibilities under the statutory language are correct.
Okay, thank you. So in a situation like this one where it's deemed to be at very high risk in 2016 and it's not funded till 2022, you put that up to more of a permitting delay problem than a communication problem?
I'm sorry, I missed part of the question.
Oh, that's okay. In this situation we're talking about, it was a project that was recognized as high risk 6 years before it was funded. So would you say that's more of a failure of the permitting process than of a lapse in communication?
Well, if it's a funded issue, it's tied to the whole appropriations, correct? So there's a delay between the authorization and appropriations, and that is an ongoing issue, and that's by the nature of the beast of how WRDA works in one committee and appropriations in another. And to your point, if it's a high hazard, communicating it to the appropriations committee and then assessing what the priorities are.
Okay, thank you. I've used up my time. I'm going to behave since I let everybody else have extra. Mr. Figures here. The chair recognizes Representative Figures for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I represent, well, thank you to all the witnesses for being here. You're getting to the end of the line here, so congratulations. I represent the 2nd Congressional District of Alabama, which includes the Port of Mobile, which is now the deepest port in the Gulf, thanks to the recent completion a couple months ago of a significant dredging process that got our port down to a depth of, I believe, about 48 feet now. And so I come here with that perspective. So I approach water resources policy, with a focus on how congressional decisions translate into real impacts for ports, the workers there, communities that depend on reliable maritime infrastructure. And ports like Mobile and obviously ports that you guys work with and represent, they rely on long-term planning. They make multi-year capital investments based on the expectation that when Congress sets policy and provides direction through the Water Resources Development Acts, that direction will be carried out as intended and that the dollars will flow therefrom to support those directives. Congress was explicit in WRDA 2020 about fully utilizing the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund and expanding eligible uses of those dollars, including for donor and energy transfer ports. Yet this administration's budget and work plans, as has been discussed throughout the hearing, have underfunded dredging and zeroed out those expanded uses. And I represent a port that is, I'd make the case that we are the most recent beneficiary, biggest beneficiary of significant dredging investments. And so it is critical that we hold the administration accountable for this and try to change this going forward with WRDA. Dr. Hasegawa, from a port operator's perspective, can you explain how deviating from clear congressional intent on the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund affects a port's ability to plan, invest, and remain competitive? And in particular, if you could put yourself in the shoes of the Mobile port. I know you work in Long Beach, but a port now that has significantly enhanced its capacity to be able to import and export goods into this country. They are doing that obviously for the first time, and so there's a lot of planning, strategic planning that goes into that, a lot of expectations that go into that. Can you explain what sort of uncertainty you would feel knowing the need for the dredging? I'm not sure how familiar you are with the geography of Mobile Bay in the Gulf of Mexico, but there's a lot of sediment at the end of in Mobile Bay that travels down literally from throughout this country. So can you explain how this environment would affect you approaching that job?
Certainly, and thank you for your question, Congressman. And as a matter of fact, I've been to Mobile and was very impressed. It was during the summer, so it's hard to forget my visit, but have been very impressed with the development of the growth that I've seen from afar in your port. And you're exactly right. This is how critical your work as a subcommittee is in funding these projects. Anytime you enable ports like Mobile or Long Beach or ports across the nation to deepen, to widen their channels, improve navigational safety, increase capacity, you're basically investing in the national economy. You're fortifying national security. For us at the Port of Long Beach, projects take many years to design, develop, finance, deliver. And it's critically important that we have a predictable and certain funding stream in order to be able to deliver projects on time. And in earlier commentary, it was talked about the necessity to streamline the permitting process because, as we all know, time is money. And as projects get delayed, costs only go up. And so it becomes critically important to deliver these projects as quickly as possible. And that's the reason why we at the Port of Long Beach support full authorization of HMT revenues. This is why we support and are asking for equitable funding for donor and energy ports.
Well, thank you. Ms. Uffner, locks and dams. I represent in my district the Black Warrior Tom Bigby River waterway, which needs significant repairs, replacements, and maintenance in the lock and dam system. Can you talk a little bit about that? I don't know, I apologize if I missed it when I stepped out, but I don't know if we've talked in depth about the need for that type of funding and that type of support as we're going forward.
One of our members, Tom Bigby. There is such incredible need for funding across the board in the water realm. And I know we keep on stressing it, whether it be locks and dams, ports, et cetera, but the locks and dams especially are extremely important to the inland waterway to really move goods to market. And when you look at the Midwest, especially along Mississippi or Pennsylvania or all the other areas, and the amount of goods that go to and from really support our national economy, and equal funding for that to make sure that we remain strong and that we can address these aging infrastructure, to make sure that the economy and the communities are safe.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Representative Kiley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Uffner, I wanted to ask you about an issue we've been dealing with in my district, because I suspect that maybe it's not the only area where this has occurred, and that perhaps there might be an opportunity to fix the larger issue. So the town of Roseville in my district had a project authorized under WRDA 2022 under Section 219, environmental infrastructure. Congress then appropriated $75,000 in the relevant appropriations bill for fiscal year 2023 for the project. But since then, the town has had a hard time working with the Army Corps on getting the project off the ground. And I'm concerned, and growing increasingly concerned, that the Corps doesn't have clear, uniform procedures to support local communities, to support them and allowing them to proceed with project implementation. So I think it would probably be helpful if the Corps could issue clearer guidance. The district offices across the nation would follow. So I wanted to ask you if you've heard of other authorized projects having trouble implementing Section 219 environmental infrastructure projects, and do you think the Corps could issue clearer guidance to district offices across the country?
Congressman, if it's okay, I'd love to get back to you on that answer.
That'd be great. Thank you. I don't know if any other witnesses have thoughts. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank again to all of our witnesses, and thanks for allowing me to wave on today. I wanted to just ask Dr. Hazagaba, I just wanted to use this opportunity to ask you about the Port of Long Beach Deep Draft Navigation Project. It's a project that obviously I'm familiar with during when I was mayor. We worked a lot with the port and the whole team on advancing it. And we know that the WRDA process is obviously complex, but I know that also bipartisan members of this committee have been involved in this effort and are strongly supportive of these types of projects. I'm grateful to hear the news that just last week, the administration had removed the pause that they had, of course, put on the project. Certainly, we look forward to working with anyone that wants to make the Port Authorization Change Report that you referenced in your opening remarks as it refers to WRDA for 2026. For those that aren't familiar with this project, could you just share a little bit more detail why it's important, not just for the port, but really for trade across the country?
Yeah, certainly, and thanks again for your question, Congressman, and thank you again for your very generous introduction and longstanding support of not just the Port of Long Beach, but ports across the nation. This Deep Draft Navigation Project is important because it enables a port like ours, who happens to be the second busiest and moves cargo across every single congressional district. It enables us to handle larger ships that carries more cargo, and it allows us to enable even more imports and exports. And our partnership with the Army Corps is such that WRDA enabled them to invest monies in this project to keep it moving forward. I will say this, Congressman, we were very surprised when we learned of the pause because this project is a project of national significance, but we're very grateful that the pause has been lifted. We're working closely with Army Corps to get the project back on track. And again, the reason investments in ports like these and projects like these are so important is because you think about the positive economic impact that ports like ours have on the national economy. You're talking about 2.7 million jobs, cargo to every congressional districts in the country.
Great, thank you. And I think we all saw, of course, during the pandemic, just some of the supply chain disruptions that were happening, how infrastructure at seaports are so important, how investments are critical to move cargo and to actually keep the economy strong. We're talking about, as you know, millions of jobs across the country are dependent oftentimes on ports in California just alone, and so I think that's really important. I know there's a tight timeline to have a post-authorization change report completed ahead of WRDA reauthorization. Do you know if the Army Corps of Engineers has indicated when they expect that report to be completed?
Well, we don't have a certain time frame, Congressman, but I can tell you that Brigadier General Lloyd was at our port just a couple of weeks ago, and we fully engaged discussions with the Army Corps. We're very optimistic that we can meet the deadline to get this in WRDA 2026.
Great, and I just want to add, just for the record also, it's really important that the Army Corps is clear and works not just with our port partners, but with members of Congress. I think oftentimes it's difficult to get information to our ports and certainly to us in the Congress on how critical it is that the Army Corps projects move forward and that we get regular updates. So I just want to make sure that we're aware of that. Just finally, before I close, briefly on the allocation of Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund dollars, can you just share one or two examples, Noel, about how important those dollars are to a port like Long Beach and so many others?
Absolutely. The reason this is so important is you take the donor ports as an example. Donor ports generate about half of all HMT revenues, but we only get about 2% in return. Yet these donor ports happen to be the ports that have the greatest impact to the local and national economy. And this is why projects like these, reauthorizing WARDA with Section 102, for example, with expanded in-water use, is so important to enable us to be a bigger economic engine for the American people.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Mr. Desaulniers for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses. I represent a district in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. I've represented the San Francisco Delta, Bay Area Delta, for a long time. It provides a large amount of clean water to the state of California, including Los Angeles, and to the ag industry. So my question for Ms. Uffner, how can areas like that with almost 8 million people and also being a great resource to the agricultural industry that produces a third of all the fruits and vegetables in the United States, as we go through this investment in infrastructure in areas like that, how do we make sure that the regional plans, and the Bay Area has a lot of government, we've got 9 counties and I don't know how many cities and special districts, how do we coordinate that and use this to make sure that we're doing the best investment for a place like that, the largest estuary west of the Mississippi, that has huge impacts not only on people who drink water, but the national economy vis-a-vis the ag industry in particular?
That's a challenging, when you're looking, because you're asking about a regional focus, how do you bring everyone to the table? And regardless of whether you're talking your area or other areas, you have a combination of both large and small governments as well as special districts, and they have different capacity needs. And getting them talking about it and the available funding, because when you're talking about the federal share versus the non-federal share, non-federal sponsors usually have a limited amount of money that they can bring to the table, which is based on whether it be taxes or community. So it's about educating and bringing them together, whether it be in a town hall, and that's getting more into details, but it's about how to bring different size levels of government to the table to talk about these challenges and what they have available.
Yeah, and in the context of sea level rise, which the Bay Area, like most areas such as ours, there's a bigger challenge. So we've invested a lot in our levees to keep the infrastructure up, trying to have that regional approach, and that we can learn from other areas that are similar to that. Mark Twain famously said, in California, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. So trying to get this opportunity from an engineering perspective in an area like that it's so crucial to get this right. And to your point, having come from local government, Prop 13 was a good thing for some people. I will include myself from a personal standpoint, but the maintenance of effort and the local match is always a problem. And it's not a good financial model because clearly the benefit to the economy on the West Coast in this instance, and to a place with California's GDP would be the 4th largest in the world right now, and water is so important. Mr. Jones, what can we learn from the Corps in this moment in sort of following on that in regions like this, how we can coordinate better with local and regional and state agencies on the pure engineering and the delivery of projects? I think this is something we can agree on a bipartisan level. We have in this committee is project delivery is important, particularly in this kind of environment.
Sure. Thank you, Congressman, for the question. You spoke of some 80 jurisdictions in your area. That is an immense challenge. One of the things that we know, though, is that water knows no political boundaries, and so water is moving about amongst those 80 different political jurisdictions. So it's going to take immense communication and coordination. From the engineering perspective, though, understanding and trying to remove as best we can the political factors in the discussion and allowing the data and the science and the engineering solutions to ultimately lead the conversation, right? Obviously, there will be political influence and discussion. There will be community input and discussion. Every stakeholder will have their say and priority. But you know, prior to you coming in, I talked about my background being from southern Louisiana. Very similar in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and the inland floodings in the state, and bringing those folks to the table to one, educate them on how water flow actually occurs, where the water needs to be, and the various uses, you know, simply put, I would just offer that there's no such thing as over-communication in this regard, and trying to have every stakeholder understand what their needs are, but as importantly, understand what the needs of their fellow stakeholders are, and ultimately try to achieve some regional priorities and then work towards those goals.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields. Are there any further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony, and the subcommittee stands adjourned.